All right, politics. This is quickly shaping up to be my fastest growing in terms of number of episodes series. So, I'm not going to call this episode Alternative Facts, but I think I'll call it something along the lines of just facts, probably. Just go with that. So, something which, it's not really a new concept to me, but I think a lot of people have been considering it, and it's brought up some new ideas to the discussions. Anyways, is that people seem to have generally, until recently, considered facts to be a straightforward, obvious thing. Even though they all seem to, in my opinion at least, and I know I'm not alone on this, they all seem to disagree about what they are, although it just doesn't come up that much. One thing that I want to point out is that scientific facts are not people facts, and people facts are not scientific facts. At least not as a rule. That what I just said is true, and actually both of them, or neither of them, as you want to say it, they both have the same claim on truth, which is to say, occasionally at random, they're true. Determining truth belongs more into philosophy, but I want to point out here that until recently, people seem to have leaned for the scientific facts, but really, people facts is what I call it anyways, is half of people seem to think of them as just stupid things which are false, and I'm not talking about alternative facts here. Alternative facts, as far as I can figure it out, they're more or less just one side pulls out the facts, as they call it, the other side pulls out other facts, and they argue about which facts are truthful. What I'm talking about here is scientific facts, which is more or less there is scientific consensus on this issue, or on this topic, and then people facts, which is people generally agree that X, neither of which have any particular reason to be true. It's just to say, this group of people thinks this, and people in general think this. There's a lot of, I want to point out that at one point it was a obvious scientific fact that the Earth is flat and the sun rotates around it, just as well as all the other planets. It's just, I want to point that out, that it's not a, nobody's quite sure when the Earth is flat thing went away, considering there's evidence that the Greeks didn't think it. But anyways, that was the truth of the day at one point. I want to, I want to point out just that people seem to sneer a lot when you hear people say, I don't think that's true about climate change. It's one obvious example. You have these people basically treating entire groups as idiots because they ignore scientific consensus on an issue. And I think that's a vastly arrogant position, aside from the fact that it's not a factually accurate one anyways. Coming from, I think, scientific fact and people fact, which is people generally agree that it's true that X, have basically the same realm within consideration, especially within consideration of how we should act, aka politics, which is why this is a politics and not a philosophy. Both have basically the equal concern. It doesn't actually matter. I should point out that no matter what truth is, it doesn't actually matter what it is. What matters is what the smart people think is true versus what people in general think is true. It is the job of the smart people to convince the average people, I'm not talking average in terms of less intelligent, I'm just talking about average as in people at large versus people who, the natural philosophers as it's sometimes referred, the people who study the world as it is, rather than the mind. So that would be, scientists, mathematicians, etc. Even though nowadays we seem to, at least until recently with the whole alternative facts thing, seem to have had this fixation on the idea that people facts were simply based on scientific facts, which I don't think they are in any sense of the term. And that scientific, and because of that, we had the idea that scientific facts are the highest facts. But recently we figured out that scientific facts actually split off from people facts, and as such, people stopped trusting them. We have an extremely high trust within people facts, and we have to earn it through scientific facts. I think the only reason scientific facts were considered such the modicum of truth as it is that until recently they generally agreed with people facts. And that, how do I put this? It's that people facts, whatever their relation to truth, which, by the way, I by no means think that facts and truth have anything to do with each other necessarily. It's just sometimes they happen to correspond. Facts are the common consensus about how the world should be viewed or about how different things should be viewed. Truth is how things are. And there's no reason that we should, not even a moral reason, that we should view the world as it is. It's just that people prefer to, for whatever reason. There's no reason we should even consider doing it. It's just that if we figure out how to be ourselves perfectly, that doesn't have to have anything to do with what's actually truthful about what we are and what the world is, as long as we know how to be ourselves as best as we can be. That's why I always liked the stories of Atlantis, the utopic, pre-medieval even, city, presumably a coastal city, which is utopic. It's utopian because it's people, at least I viewed it as, because it's people understood themselves and their world in such a way that allowed them to be truly themselves. There's no way they understood everything about the world, but in that they understood it in a way which allowed them to be truly themselves. It doesn't matter at that point because they have created a utopia. We could lose all of science and nothing major, in my view, would be lost if what we gained for the loss of all of that knowledge was the knowledge of what we are and what we desire and what we intend. This knowledge would allow us to create a utopia. Science would not. At best, science can create the facilities to better understand ourselves. And of course, I think people forget that a lot with the purely theoretical mathematicians. Not to say I think that people should stop being mathematicians. I, for one, don't think there is a huge amount to be gained from history, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it above most subjects. Well, at least not history in that what happened, as much as history in that we figure out why it happened and try and determine what... Anyways, there's history, like mathematics, is mostly not used in its best sense for humanity, more for its interesting sense of the science, the science of history, if you can call it, if that's the correct term. I'm not really sure. But anyways, the thing is about these people facts is that they don't have to have anything to do with truth. In fact, if they do, it might actually be a bad thing, because in that they are directly truthful, they might be counterproductive to better understanding ourselves. And that's what I suppose I could call that good facts versus truth. And good facts have nothing to do with truth directly. Again, it's simply that they have to do with being ourselves in our truest forms. And again, that's philosophy. That's very philosophy. But I want to point out that the whole obsession with getting scientific fact, which is really what they're talking about, when people say, "Oh, you've got to go to the real truth" or something like that, or real facts. I want those people talking about how they want objective or truthful or real facts. What they actually mean by that is they want scientific facts, And they don't even want that because they just have people facts which tell them that science is more reliable than people who disagree with them, because science generally agrees with them. Like, if the sides were flipped, if the current sitting president of the United States, if science were to agree with him strictly, or at least his organization very strictly, then I think the tables would be flipped, and this current people who are saying they want objective facts would be saying it doesn't matter what the scientists say, it matters what is really truthful. Anyways, the tables would be flipped. It has nothing to do with the actual desire for scientific truth. It just has to do with which set of people facts science more closely relates to, and that just so happens to be the people who are contrary to the current sitting United States president and his more conservative organizations, who at least work with him, if not for him. At least, hopefully. So, yeah, I guess that's the best way I can put it without going fully into the philosophy of why scientific truth really matters. Also, I want to point out, I have attempted to avoid anti-scientism here, but at the same time, as many people like to, I'm not going to go into scientism. The only reason I think why there's so many scientism believers out there, and by the way, scientism is the belief that science is the only method to finding truth, and anti-scientism is the belief that science in its nature cannot be truthful. Anyways, or at least is contrary to the finding of truth. Anyways, I'm trying to avoid both, but the reason I think that a lot of people head towards scientism is simply that their subjective, experience-based beliefs simply happen to line up with science. For one thing, there's things like race science, which I know a lot of people are against. Most aren't actually against it because they don't think it's a legitimate science. They're against it because they think it's bigoted or something like that, which is more about experience, and that's not a bad thing. But it's people facts. It's people facts which tell them pretty much if there actually is a correlation between something like race and intelligence, that you should never ever tell anyone about it because you will be shunned. I'm not saying there is or that we should research into these things. I'm simply saying that we as a species should not pretend like we behave objectively. We don't. We behave emotionally in our most pure form, and as a result, we can pretend we can't even really pretend even that we do such things as pretending like the reason that we destroy the bigots within our own society. We can pretend like the reason we do that is because they're objectively worse than other people, but in reality, the reason we do this is because we emotionally dislike them, which is fine. I'm not against this. I'm just against pretending like we're doing things for reasons other than the reasons we're doing. We're acting emotionally and getting emotionally upset at people who say we're acting emotionally. And we tell them, no, we're acting scientifically, we're acting objectively, and we're not. We're just not. And we get upset at them for even suggesting the notion that we could do anything but act in such a manner that would say, I am this strong scientist who only acts on objective truth. It's just not how people are. So, anyways, I hope this made at least some sense to some people. Enjoy the, so enjoy the generalized outro, or maybe by this point I'll have figured out a real outro for politics, but don't get your hopes up. Enjoy whatever outro.